Well, welcome everybody to Pieces of the Puzzle. Today we will be talking about navigating the build for rent journey. I am very excited that we have everybody here today. I have Peggy Dalton from Stewart Title. I also have Beth O'Brien from Encore Finance, as well as Troy Evans from Marketplace Homes. Welcome everybody.
Hey, Audrey.
Hello, Audrey.
So I would love for everybody to go around and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how your company is involved in the build for rent space specifically and what really makes you all unique.
Sure. Hi, I'm Beth O'Brien, and I am the founder and CEO of Encore Finance. I've been in the private lending space now for about 13 or 14 years, forming kind of a series of different private lenders. And those of you who've heard me speak before or who know me know how much a fan I am of the build to rent space. It won't solve all of our problems, but it certainly is addressing a huge need for housing. Particularly in the cohort that really requires housing now. It's meeting a lot of the demographic challenges that we're having and a lot of the economic challenges that we're having. So getting all of the pieces of this puzzle together is really something I think we're all passionate about. And I know the audience is interested in. And so we're excited to talk about it with you, Audrey, over the next hour or so.
Thank you, Beth.
I'll go ahead and go. Hi, I'm Peggy Dalton with Stewart Title. I'm the Senior Director of Operations, and I oversee their National Investor Solutions Group. We service all 50 states, U.S. territories, and within my group, we support all aspects of the SFR and BFR space, which includes data analytics, resourcing, valuations, credit, title, settlement. We have a full service platform.
Thank you, Peggy.
My turn. My name is Troy Evans. I am the Director of Investor Services at Marketplace Homes. We do several things from a brokerage and a new construction standpoint, but for the sake of this conversation, discussing our third-party property management program, where we manage slightly below 10,000 doors, both from a build for rent and scattered SFR standpoint. We're about 60% institutional, a 40% individual owner, which I think lends itself to an interesting perspective to this conversation to see how we are able to bridge the individual and institutional through our management. Let either party take advantage of what we've learned from the other. Our main focus being that we want to bridge the asset management and property management space somewhere in the middle to give a little bit more of a refined approach in the 38 states that we operate in.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Well, I'm excited for this conversation. Let's dive right into the build for rent process. So depending on what role you play in the industry, your touch points on the project may differ considerably. For us here at SFRhub Marketplace, we love to be involved as early on as possible with the land seller or the builder in order to really get our hands on the optimal build for rent floor plans and maybe adjust those that were planned for the community, as well as take a look at the site planning and the amenities that are planned. We know that these things can all have a huge impact on the NOI. And so when we are looking at optimizing a community from a build for rent perspective, there are a lot of things that we like to look for. So I would love to start with you, Beth. From the debt perspective, what are you really looking for in a build for rent community that is going to make it successful from a product standpoint and a site planning standpoint?
So yeah, if we back up to the kind of land entitlement, which is kind of the first piece of it, there's some real pluses and minuses to either going single parcel or contiguous parcel. And I think that's one of the first decisions that people are making. We're agnostic. You can certainly do both and have a really successful build to rent community. You're going to have more flexibility with debt financing if you single parcel. You're going to have probably more flexibility in terms of setbacks and density if you go contiguous parcel. So you do need to sit down before you're really developing your site, once you've identified it, and think about what your highest and best use is. And then how much flexibility you're going to need on the financing side, because the single parcel gives you both residential and commercial flexibility in a different way. If you go with the contiguous, you're probably, I mean, look, your goal may be agency financing eventually, which can work for either. But if you're looking for different types of bridge loans, different types of construction loan, you really do open yourself to more by having the individual parcels. Again, not strictly required. And there are ways around it too, with condo associations or other types of residential features that could overlay the commercial aspect of the site. But I think what's important to keep in mind is that it is commercial, it is residential, it could be both, it could be neither. And that's where I think working with somebody early is going to help you maximize your flexibility for what it is you're trying to achieve. Because like I said, any one of these options can work. But if you have a specific idea in mind that you're trying to achieve, you should involve your kind of debt professional early, or your other site planners. I know you also had a lot of experience in helping people early to kind of keep their options open.
Absolutely. And it really depends on the municipality that you're working in as well, because you may see some property tax differences, as well as some impact on the other operational expenses. And so, yes, both ways can work, but you may see increasing expenses on one in one municipality. And it may be the complete opposite in a different municipality. So it's great really to start working with either a third-party consultant, or start working with your debt provider or your broker, or even property management beforehand, so you can really start to understand the ins and outs of each different option.
Right. Even just how heavily amenitized the community is could have a huge impact. And look, amenities are fantastic, but are you putting the right amenities that actually is going to add value to the rent or not add value to the rent, right?
Exactly.
And how much does that affect you if you're individually parceling? Because obviously you can't individually fractionalize the one amenities situation, those kind of things.
Right. And does the cost to build that amenity package, are you getting that equal or more in rent from the resident, or is it just below and it's not really going to pay off to, put in a massive pool and clubhouse?
I'm sure you've seen the same thing. I'm actually really surprised how some amenities can add significant value, like the dog shower. But I mean, people really want things that are part of their living exposure, right? But some of the things that we think of as being sexy and grand and large actually don't add to the rents. And so that's where I think you can put things in that are not that expensive, that are accretive, and other things that are crazy expensive that may not be accretive.
Absolutely. And I think what it all boils down to is people love their dogs. Renters love their dogs. So anything dog related, whether it's a dog shower, a dog park, walking trails, fenced yards, even on the homes, we see those having the biggest impact on rent premiums.
As do we.
And leasability. Yep, which is huge. Peggy, I would love to jump to you. Any thoughts here that you want to add in regards to transactions that you facilitated? I'm curious, what product types are you seeing transact the most, and what types of communities?
Well, the exciting thing is we're seeing all product types and a couple of new ones, which we didn't anticipate. So development, from land acquisition to the certificate of sale. That's the longest trail, the longest work cycle in the build for rent group. But we are seeing that again as far as acquisitions on large parcels. So that's encouraging. Scattered sites are still popular. We are seeing two types of scattered sites, a single and then batch purchases. And scattered, from an inventory standpoint, a builder may have scattered sites available, and one investor will come in and take the lot. So we're seeing that. We're still seeing the entire community purchase from the investor, from a builder to investor sale. And as far as the one line that we're seeing a bigger increase now is the construction loans on a single build. So that's covering more of a smaller investor that is managing a single build, and we're seeing an increase in construction loans there. So that, and then the one that we didn't anticipate at all, we're seeing is a young or less aged build for rent that is maybe less than 2 years old. A whole community is selling from one investor to another. Even though it's not really build for rent, they're still very new properties. So we're seeing that as well.
Absolutely. Well, and when we're also still dealing with such a supply constraint, I think we'll see those well-designed build for rent communities that have a couple years under their belt really be an attractive product on the market because they have proved out their rents as well.
Peggy, are you actually seeing on those single asset deals that they're identified as build to rent up front? Like it is clear, like what's identifying, what's making it clear that it's build to rent and not build for sale when someone, or spec construction?
It's being set up as an investor, as the actual borrower.
Right.
So that's how we know. With
It's
our
just
group,
it's just such a different underwrite if
Yeah.
you're looking at market rent versus sales comps, and obviously you're looking at both, but it is a really interesting piece of what we're seeing in the market because there's just so little supply that you're even seeing build to rent urban infill in individual locations.
well, and it's the borrowers that we haven't seen for a while either, as far as the buyers are concerned. Maybe the operators that are under 200 units, they're starting to reface and build new construction on lots that they may have the opportunity to buy, or a small parcel they can split into a couple lots. So we're also seeing that.
Peggy, have you seen any certain product that doesn't end up transacting very well, or you end up having issues during transaction?
I think I'm always the first one to pipe up and say, know who you're working with. If you are not the land developer, that's probably the biggest heartache we've seen over the last couple of years. Because we have individuals that have owned parcels that say, okay, now I'm going to develop it. They really don't have the experience and don't engage with someone that does. You get into a contract situation, with an inexperienced developer, and you could be years down the road and still not have a product. So I think that that's probably the cautionary tale of the build for rent space.
Completely agree. And I think that's more important now than it ever has before, just because I think there's been a lot of groups that have been able to enter the build for rent space in the last couple of years. And now you really want to be working with and partnering with and transacting with the experts in this space, because there's been a lot of things learned over the past couple of years and a lot of challenges that have to be avoided or rerouted around. So super important. And I'm glad you brought that up.
One thing that was encouraging for me, Q4, we saw in years gone by, there was always a rush to get in the markets that have colder weather, have obstacles like snow and cool weather to deal with. There was always a rush to get as many units under roof as they could get, and we actually saw that behavior in Q4, which was exciting to see.
Troy, let's jump to you. I know you have some great insights on what also creates an optimal build for rent community, more from the operational side. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I know everybody in this industry always wants to know what are the premiums to be had for certain community amenities as well as home features.
Yeah, and as are we. I think just like Beth and others, I love my dog too, right? So what does that get me? And we've definitely seen that with our residents. I think when you look at the premiums, usually what we get asked, and sort of to another one of Beth's points earlier, as we get involved earlier, it's what are we seeing that residents want? What are our common asks? Making sure that we're retaining that data so we can actually put that to good use. And it's all market dependent, right? In Chicago and Baltimore, we have some build for rent communities where they're townhomes and a dog park and a walking trail, to everybody's point, does work better, right? That is something that is of value. You're also not going to build really an outdoor pool in one of those communities. Those don't really pencil out when you can use it 4 months out of the year. The overall community, we've seen fluctuate. It seemed about 2 years ago, the premium on new construction from a rent perspective, and I just read a John Burns report that backed this up. was somewhere between 25 and 35%. That's kind of what we were seeing on a similar existing asset with similar features, similar finishes. If they had fenced backyards, those types of things. Now we're getting closer to the 20 to 25% in these markets when we look at similar product. A little bit more when you don't have another build for rent community right in the same town, which we're running into a lot in the Sun Belt. I think that's going to stabilize somewhere around 18 to 19%. Premium on existing, in the Midwest where people are used to more of an existing asset class, maybe a little bit more. Something down in the Sun Belt where you can get something similar down the street. It's all going to come down to who your target resident is. What are they looking for? What's the feedback telling us? We've had some communities move with a lease up incentive, others move with a washer and dryer that come in the unit. And taking those values and applying them to rent in the right way. We don't want to treat every community exactly the same, or this is never going to work.
Right. Well, I think what's unique about build for rent compared to other asset classes as well as, you're really getting delivered these homes in tranches. So you can take what you've learned from the first couple of tranches when it comes to lease up and apply that to these next homes, whether it's adding the washer and dryer, if you hadn't included that before and you have tenants asking for it. And really being able to, move the rent back and forth depending on what you're seeing in demand. As well as if the community is still under construction and it is large enough, we've actually seen adding a different unit mix. Maybe there is more 4 bedrooms demanded in the market or more 3 bedrooms demanded in the market. You can kind of make that shift. So I think that's super unique to the build for rent industry that doesn't get talked about enough is the flexibility that you have when you're starting to really experiment with the operation side.
Yeah, and to that point, when you're looking at purpose-built communities versus some of those infills or just buying, off of an inventory sheet, we've seen, you just had an example, a house in White House, Tennessee, outside of Nashville. They sold to other similar investors, institutional players, and not only are you competing with others directly in the same neighborhood that bought at the exact same time, but come to find out that 3-bed is a lot more desirable than a 4, right? But again, when we have a build for rent community outside of Atlanta that was coming in 2 delivery schedules, we were able to update the unit mix, 6 months in advance to focus more on those 4 beds versus the 3 because we were seeing those lease up a lot faster. So those are always great things that we can focus on. And it's just all about how we're going to approach the different asset type, scattered versus purpose built, and how we can get involved.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you touched on a good point there that the unit mix really makes a difference depending on what market you're in. So, some Georgia markets, some Texas markets, we see the larger floor plans and more bed count be the most popular and in demand, especially in those suburban markets. But when you get more infill or into some really smaller markets, some of those 3 bedrooms are much more in demand. So definitely something to consider when you're underwriting these communities and planning what floor plans and unit mix you're going to run with is what is the demographics of these markets and what is the supply and demand that's already present on the ground or going to be built. Build for rent, it's such a new asset class still in a sense. And so we are seeing a lot of these communities start being built and leased up. In the past, we haven't had many comps, but I think in these next years, we are going to start to see supply increase. And therefore, we have to be competitive with our product in order to be successful and get those leases compared to the other communities.
Yeah, completely agree.
It's also super interesting, Audrey, what Peggy mentioned earlier, which is that some of these recent communities are starting to trade. Mm-hmm. So you are getting actually trading comps, which we had none of in the build to rent space, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And to that point too, Beth, we're seeing these larger builders, right, that have the capital sources to sell at stabilization, right? So then you're really getting true numbers when you go into these. The underwriting isn't as intense. You know exactly what incentives you're going to need the next lease up round and all of those things. So yeah, both you and Peggy, that's a very good point.
I think the interesting thing is a couple of the markets that we've seen the trades in have been more workforce solutions. for the market, rather than there's definitely a shortage. The markets that we're seeing those in would be more like Michigan, Indiana, Minnesota, markets that we haven't seen a huge population in before have all of a sudden become very popular.
It's very interesting to see that shift. And I think we've seen, a lot of movement to, outskirt markets in the past couple of years when we were going through COVID and the whole work from home. And now we're still, seeing that transition. Now, some people are going back to the office, some are still working from home. I think it's a little bit more unique and not as predictable at this point in where are people moving. So very much important to still be looking at that household income level, jobs, schools, everything that makes a great market for build front. Well, let's talk numbers. Beth, would you let us in on what terms look like today and what yield are you underwriting to?
Yeah, so obviously there's some ranges, and it's highly dependent on LTV, market, build, and all of the things that we all know. But I'll give you some ranges to kind of just target people or anchor people to certain parts. So it really does depend too if you're looking at bank financing, which is not completely dried up. The reports of it being completely dead are, I think, overblown, but it is not as flush as it was. So the bank financing is definitely still the lowest range in terms of coupon. You can certainly see construct, and by the way, I'm gonna bifurcate the numbers a little bit between construction build to rent and maybe lease up build to rent. When you have a C of O, but you're waiting for stabilization, are two totally different debt markets right now, and they're really evolving independently. But people call both of them build to rent, so there may be some confusion as to what kind of coupon rates you're hearing. But anyway, the bank market for actual construction is probably in the 300s, which sounds very attractive from a spread perspective. But remember, if you're going to qualify for the bank financing, they're going to be looking for deposits, looking for a relationship, and you're going to be at a very low LTV. You're probably at 20% deposits, and you may be no higher than like a 50 or 55 LTV. Used to be kind of more of a 60 market. You're definitely seeing a pullback to get that type of attractive spread. Now, the private lender market is going to solve some of your percentage advance numbers. You're going to get a little higher. You're going to get a lot higher, 60 to 75 LTC range. But you're going to pay for it, right? You're going to be in the 400 to 600 range over, depending on all the other factors I was talking about. And so it'd be in construction closer to the 500 to 600s, right? You were definitely seeing lease up lines though to the same type of builders with C of O at very decent LTCs and LTVs in the particularly LTV, because now you're getting a completed valuation. And those you're seeing definitely in the 300s and low 400s. And so that's kind of one of the sweet spots in the market that people are pretty excited about, are those lease up lines. And you're seeing more and more of those because the advance rates and the coupons are both within a reasonable range. Whereas if you're looking at pure construction, I think people are still a little startled by either how low the advance rate is or how high the coupon, how high the spread is. And that's just kind of the push-pull. Again, very important to sit back and think about what is it that you're looking for and that you need, and to try to find the one that addresses your main concern and then work around the other parameters, because there are so many different inputs that impact it. And, from a debt yield perspective, obviously people are looking for higher debt yields now, probably an 8 to 9%, somewhere in there, 8.5 kind of average, which is higher than it has been. People are looking in, less obscure markets, despite the fact that people want to move to some of those markets. The financiers don't. They would prefer the more liquid, slightly better markets. That doesn't mean you can't be in a secondary market by any means, but the tertiary markets are very hard to find funding for, because they just don't have the liquidity, the job growth, all of the things that you were mentioning earlier, Audrey.
Completely agree. And we find that in those markets, there's not many comps either. So that's very hard from the debt side as well as our side to underwrite these deals and really have solid numbers on where those rents are going to be. I am curious, how are you seeing today's rates, the ones that you just described? How are you seeing those being perceived in the market? Is there a lot of deals that are still getting done?
Yeah, so here's what I would say about the market right this minute that I find interesting is that, and it's funny, I was at a lunch the other day with a bunch of different people and everyone kept using this word, which was transactable. Okay, so we're not seeing huge volume yet, but things are finally transactable, meaning people have kind of found a common ground. Deals are absolutely happening. It's at a much better pace this quarter than last quarter. And last quarter was not the year before when things were literally at a full stop. Things were happening, but and again, it's not that there's tons of transactions because, as you know, there's just not that much inventory, unfortunately. But what is for sale and what is happening now are at numbers that people are getting to on both sides. And so I think hopefully we move from transactable to high volume again, but I do actually like that term for what I think is going on in the market right now. And I can see Peggy and Troy shaking their heads a little bit, that it resonates, right? It's kind of a relatable term.
It does, and I think the one thing that we've noticed is but the transactions are surviving the due diligence period, and that's key for us.
That's what makes it transactable, right? Like the valuations are holding, the coupon, everything is holding.
Everyone waits for it to get past that due diligence when you're, when you're doing your critical dates letter, we're all waiting to make sure it gets past the due diligence. So, and they're actually.
And finally, where the valuations are coming in at numbers that both sides are expecting. I mean, you're never perfect, right? All of our children are beautiful, except everyone else, right? But my dog definitely. But it looks like things are transactable, and that's kind of good news, is that it's stable and transactable.
That's great news.
Yeah, one mention of the due diligence period, that was one change that we are seeing. We've seen a 10% improvement in the cancellations, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a great.
That's a big move.
Yeah.
Well, 10% cancellations would be huge, but what are the cancellations about?
Improvement in what was canceling over 23, because people were anything that wasn't a perfect fit wasn't surviving.
Right? I'm funny, I'm not even 100% sure it's a word. I think it is, but whatever.
I'm using it.
Right? Like, I think we should all start using it now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think to me, transactable means that we're really starting to see the shift back into activity, right? It's kind of the in between stages of being very stagnant, like we were in this past year, to now things are starting to move and shake again, and we're starting to get back into our rhythm in a more comfortable rate environment, which is always good news. And I think we're going to see that conversation really start to progress, and people just start to get more comfortable into jumping back into, making some of these deals work.
Yeah, and it's not like, Audrey, that the rates have come in. They haven't. But they've stabilized. People aren't as worried that next week the values are going to change because the cap rate's going to change again. People finally are saying, okay, this is an appropriate cap rate, and I have a market comp, and I have a valuation that came in right. I have all the pieces that Peggy needs to get through the due diligence.
Right. People just wanted to know what they were working with. So when it was so unpredictable, it was very hard to make a deal underwrite, and you knew you had to build in some spread in order to make a deal work, but you didn't even know how big that spread needed to be. And so I think we're starting to see that stabilization and more transactionable deals, just based on the fact of, okay, now we know what debt is going to cost, or we know how the market looks a little bit better, and we're a little bit more comfortable with it.
And I'm not going to be wrong 3 weeks from now when I go back to my committee, or someone is looking at my data. One of the problems last year was that people could have been right and be using the right judgment, and they were wrong 3 weeks later. And it wasn't because they were wrong, but the market had moved that much in those 3 weeks. The volatility, and in both directions at the end of the year, the volatility was moving back and forth before people kind of just got into this maybe higher, longer stage that we're in now, but at least not going higher, longer stage, right?
Right. Well, and I think not only in the rate environment was things unsteady, but also in the rental rates and vacancy rates. Troy, I'm sure you've seen some of that recently, if not in this past year, is just the very drastic changes in rent up and down that we're seeing in some of these communities, as well as the vacancy rates and really the lease up velocity. So I would love if you would share with us, Troy, some of your experience in the vacancy rates that you're seeing across the country, as well as what are some of the markets that are experiencing below average national vacancy rates.
Yeah, it's been a strong, it's like the end of February. I was going to say a strong January. Let's call it a strong first quarter to the year, especially from a lease up perspective. Our build footprint is very scattered throughout the United States, which is convenient for us because so is our single family rental footprint. So it aligns pretty well. A lot of what we actually have on our build friend side, to be candid, was actually taken from another property management company that was hovering around the 60% occupancy number mark. And happy to say that as of this morning, we're at 97% on our build for rent portfolio.
Amazing.
Some of that has to do with the nitty grittiness of our leasing team. Actually, a lot of it does, and a huge shout out to them. But another part of that has to do with just the comfort level, also from a resident perspective, in the asset class and to what they're renting. I think we can all agree, we've seen it one way or another, whether it's through social media or the news, that our resident base has become very budget friendly over the last few years, right? There's not as much stimulus going out, which was obviously helping, and those types of things. So focusing not only on the bottom number, but what's the value they're getting out of the asset in and of itself compared to others around it has been very important. And again, identifying what those marks are. And in some markets, like I mentioned earlier, that's easier. Chicagoland and in Indiana and Michigan, to Peggy's point, where you don't see a whole lot of this going on. It's been moving the needle on rents. That has been the big factor. There's only so many amenities you can put in those communities just due to the weather that we get up here. I'm in Detroit, so I know exactly how cold it gets in this neck of the woods. Whereas down in the South, we've had a little bit of a harder time pushing that lease up, right? Because there's a similar product, in the same city, right? And we have a community in Clarksville where there's another community that came online 3 months after we started lease up, lower rents, same amenities, right? Because they had budgeted those in. So our vacancy shot up, or our lease up volume had shot up in those markets. So where we're starting to see the vacancy decrease and our occupancy go up are those areas like in your secondary markets where you're not running right into the same players as you would. You might be going up against more historical multifamily groups getting into the build for rent versus institutional SFR getting into the build for rent space. So we're hovering at 97% occupancy, which is great. Sunbelt's making it a little bit more difficult, but the Midwest and secondary markets, those have been really, really strong. We're still leasing things, in the Atlantas and in the Fort Myers and Orlandos of the world and in Dallas, but you're not running into the same concerns from a resident perspective, that's for sure.
Well, that's a massive jump going from 60% occupancy up to 97%. And you mentioned that it was partly due to your, grittiness as a property management group. And I would love to know a little bit more insight on that. What are the tools and the levers that you're pulling in order to get that occupancy up?
Yeah, we represent ourselves as a sales organization, right? And while we are a strong operator and we have the data, we've spent the last year gathering all of our systems into one reportable format and and giving the institutions and the REITs what they need from a reporting standpoint. You still need those boots on the ground or your leasing agents selling residents. That's what you need. It is sales, and the best multifamily groups do this. I've rented from larger multifamily communities around here, and they're great at following up on your concerns and overcoming those objectives. The biggest hurdle with that is we as a property management company have to convince the owner at the end of the day, how to properly incentivize as part of their budget. But that's why getting in early helps, so that we can say you're going to need to bake in these incentives already or add these into your community. But it's our team's ability, and anybody out there who's really doing this, their team's ability to sell the resident on coming in. And that doesn't mean bait and switch by any means. We back away from that with a 10-foot pole, but it's really getting them through their concerns. The rent's higher. That might be true, but your experience is going to get better. And that same John Burns report that I mentioned, they were talking about their resident surveys and what they were looking for. And while the vintage and age of the home was very important to about 30% to 40% of the residents, having it professionally managed and knowing that their maintenance solutions are going to be taken care of was between 40 to 55% of like what those residents were looking for. And that was a staggering number because people are tired of the landlords that don't get the maintenance done or that seemingly don't care. So as they're going into this asset class, it's more professionally managed. They know what they're getting themselves into, and it's overcoming those typical objections that they've had historically renting with the individual landlord that they might have not had a great experience with.
So what it sounds like to me is that the hands-on solution is really the way to go when it comes to management. Residents are looking for somebody to really walk them through the process, answer their questions, and then take care of them once they are moved in. Which I see that being kind of a shift that has happened in the market in the last 3 years. We noticed that, 2020 and 2021, there was a lot of build front communities that were able to lease up successfully, having off-site property management, not even having live leasing team in the community, and doing a lot of the self-leasing and self-touring. We are now seeing such a shift, completely opposite of that, where you need a lot of hands-on to what you said, and really just getting in touch with those potential tenants as well as the current tenants to see what is working out for them in the community, what are they enjoying about the community, and almost even more importantly is what is not going well in the community, or what do they not like about the lease up process or the product or the community. All of that insight is huge, especially in a seasonal market like we've seen over the past couple of months, where lease up may be a little trickier in some of those Sunbelt states. So great to hear that insight. And there are a lot of levers that you're able to pull when it comes to application fees, or move-in specials, or things that can get people across that finish line when it comes to leasing these homes.
Yeah, and we do it both ways, right? We have some boots on the ground models which work with your larger communities, and we have some more remote single family, which you have sub 50. We have some communities with 30 units in it, right? That might work, especially from a budget standpoint, right? You don't need to carry all of that operating costs with you, and that overhead on your balance sheet. And at the end of the day, whether it's single family approach where it could be more offsite, or the more multifamily approach where it's more on-site, I think the residents at the end of the day want to know that there's somebody in their corner too, and there's a lot of news out there about these large institutions buying up build for rent because it's a popular story, but I don't think it's as negative as people are making it, as long as it's operated with somebody who truly cares about what they're doing, somebody they can pick up the phone and call, that they know is right there and knows their situation, knows their community. We have property managers that know these residents inside and out, know what their concerns are, and work tirelessly to get it done. And I think that makes all the difference in the world for a resident at the end of the day.
Completely agree. And that makes all the difference in the PM that you hire to be on these communities, because there are PMs in this market that don't do as well as a job and aren't as involved as I know Marketplace is. So I give you guys major props for that.
It's a hard business.
Yeah.
It's a hard business.
I have a question, Troy, from what you're saying. It sounds like the initial attraction of the tenant is getting more competitive, but our underwriting, at least right now, would suggest that the turn rates have not gotten worse. So what is that also your experience, and what do you attribute that to? Like getting them in and then you can keep them. It doesn't seem like it's harder to keep them than it used to be. Just it's maybe harder to get them in, or am I misreading the underwriting signs?
So it's a great question. And we found it really all depends on, and we're kind of in a fluctuating point, right? There's a great example. We assumed a lot of our residents in one community who were told from the previous manager there would be a clubhouse and a pool. Well, that was never in the plans, right? So of course, they're not renewing as well as we would have hoped that they would. But our renewal rate is extremely stable. And I think it's because, again, with this asset class, there has to be more of a professional management to it. You're not going to, and I think these local shops do great, with 200-300 homes that they manage in a city are awesome. I think they build a great portfolio. But what the residents are expecting from more of a higher end asset class is a higher end hands-on approach. And I think when you can do that in a professional manner, which they're expecting, just helps align expectations all the way through. It makes for a much better renewal period. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, look, and we're also seeing it in the workforce group that the renewal rates are pretty high. I mean, I have one built to rent client who's definitely more workforce focused, not amenities focused. In fact, one of her lines is the amenities we offer are the front door and the back door. Because it's a home, right? And that's what they're getting. And look, they have amazingly high occupancy rates and satisfaction and everything else, but they're geared towards a different class than the person who's looking for all the amenities, right? So I'm agnostic as to what your strategy is, as long as you have a strategy that works in your community with the tenant base that you have.
Our whole strategy is doing good, right? And that means having the right expectation that we want to do good for people, but also we want to execute well on what that mission is. And that resonates with residents all around. We have everything from, $400 rentals here in Metro Detroit to $5,000 a month rentals in Florida. And our approach is exactly the same. They can expect the same regard, the same process, same hand holding. And I think that's helpful, whether your amenities, your front door or your back door. You just want to know that your stuff, those amenities are going to get taken care of at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, I have a few group questions I would love to hear each one of your take on. Let's start with the key challenges that you've been seeing and how are you overcoming them? Peggy, let's start with you.
Okay, so the key challenges, of course, overcoming the due diligence periods have been a huge leap prior to the 2024 start. But as far as the biggest challenges are going to remain the same. Development that is going from land development to construction to the infrastructure. I think the infrastructure delays are probably still some of the biggest challenges that we see in the new construction side of the house. The winds, again, like I said, the behavior that we saw as far as the winds at the end of the year, where the poor weather states were getting properties under roof so they could work through the winter on them and get them delivered in the spring. So I think that behavior alone shows a great improvement.
Thank you, Peggy. Beth, what are some of the key challenges you've been seeing and how are you overcoming them?
So some of the biggest challenges have been, I think, building on some of what Peggy's been saying. There were, in the past 2 years, some decent amount of delays in some of the construction, a little bit of overrun, some of it really in entitlement, in communities just not getting certain things, like some of it really not on the builder side, but delays nonetheless, and extensions. And so we're seeing a fair amount of rebalancing and potential refis even mid-construction, which is rare, and not due to distress so much as just the time periods on these construction loans coming near the end. And so one of the things I think that's helping is if people have really over communication with their lenders and there's some kind of a partnership, but there's also been a little bit of a dry up in the friends and family type money and the shift, thankfully, for the institutions coming back in. And so you do have this interesting dynamic now where some loans that have been outstanding, some communities that have been under construction are really going through what I call a rebalancing phase. And that can be complicated in this kind of a market. And I think that was one of the bigger struggles of last year. But again, I'm starting, like the transactable comment, I'm starting to see some breakage there, some breakthroughs, where because the capital is more interested in coming back into the space, there has been enough progress. You can identify that it was, X, Y, or Z in either the supply chain or the fact that they just could not get the town to come out and approve whatever the water or the sewage or the electricity was. And we're starting to see some movement there as well. But that has been challenging for people because you're coming up against hard milestones in the different documents.
Completely agree. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned from 2023 is all of the difficult deals that groups have had to work with, whether they have been successful or whether they had to go on pause. I think everybody in the build for rent space that's developing these deals or buying these build for rent deals or even selling the build for rent deals have had to overcome a lot of obstacles and learned from those obstacles. And so everybody is having to adapt and get a lot more creative to get these deals done, which is always a great thing for an industry when people start getting a little bit more innovative.
Yeah,
How about you?
as you say, the biggest obstacle has been time. Either not getting it done in time or getting the people in time, and that time in what are traditionally 24 to 36 month loans or construction periods has caused a lot of these hiccups. Again, not meaning that the developments are distressed, but that they're showing the effects of time on the different structures. And so, and I think, but I am seeing some very encouraging signs of that being worked through.
Fantastic. Troy, I will jump to you.
So some challenges over the last year or so, and we typically don't get active until the end of all these processes. So Beth and Peggy, you guys see it a lot earlier than we do. We've underwritten a lot of opportunities, for others, and we try to give a true third-party unbiased opinion, rents, incentives, amenities, makeup of the units and those types of things. And we've done probably 100 communities that we've underwritten. But again, to Beth's comment earlier, what's transactable, right? And we haven't seen those really come through to fruition. But we're starting to see signs of that picking up, some honest conversations, seeing LOIs go out, and truly being able to get our boots on the ground teams together on these communities. And that's very exciting. The other thing that we have seen, which is kind of an opposite of what the question is success on that scattered inventory of new construction from the individual investor perspective. They're able to enter that market with that better asset that operates better. So that's been some shining light this quarter as well, is seeing those individuals transact also.
Fantastic. I know some of the biggest challenges we've had to work through, it comes to the underwriting of a lot of these build for rent communities. I think in this past 12 months, we've seen a lot of fluctuation on the rent side, whether this is more supply coming on the ground and you're seeing some rents have to drop to get a little bit more competitive, or even in some cases in some months of this past year, seeing rents rise considerably, which is always good news. It's not so good of news when you see rents fall a couple $100. But it's really starting to work with the buyer to make sure that, this deal can still remain transactable and that it can still be underwritten. So I think there's bigger margins that still have to be built in when it comes to taking a look at the rental side. And then on the other hand, you have the operational expenses. We've seen a massive increase in insurance rates, as we know everybody's aware of, as well as a lot of the, management expenses and different fees along the line, contracts like landscaping contracts as well, totally dependent on what market you're in. So I think on both hands, you're seeing the rents be a little bit unpredictable, as well as some of the expenses have been a little bit unpredictable. So I think that really leads to the opportunity of getting more people involved, whether that's a third party build for rent feasibility report and having a second opinion on rents and absorption and supply and demand for the community, or getting property management involved earlier or your debt involved earlier to make sure that everybody's really getting their hands on it and getting comfortable with the deal and where the numbers are set. So, what I know we've chatted a little bit about this, but is there anything else you'd like to add when looking at what do you see the new opportunities for 2024 being? Is there anything that you are individually excited about when it comes to the build front space and trends that we may see progressing or new features in communities? I would love to get your guys' thoughts. Beth, I will start with you if you have some.
So I think from the debt perspective, one of the biggest opportunities for 2024 are forward sales. To the extent that the communities can develop forward sales, either in tranches to one investor or one institution that's taking over the whole community, or as I think Peggy alluded to earlier, there is this interesting trend of people taking slices of communities and not necessarily committing to the whole one, but picking up certain number of assets, and maybe the builder is keeping the property management. Maybe there's an outside property management. Like, it doesn't feel like it's fractional ownership, but there's a lot of that going on. And so to the extent that the developer can come up with some of these forward sales, and again, they don't have to be to one individual. They can be even to one at a time in a forward sale, weirdly. That is going to improve their ability to just keep the cash moving, keep the construction going, allow them to be in more sites at the same time and not get over their skis.
Great, thank you. How about you, Peggy?
I think the exciting forward thinking for 2024 would definitely be the creativity that we're seeing. It's not a one size fits all, and each investor is looking at what works for them, what they can commit to, and when it'll be ready. And I think the availability is going to be key in 2024 as far as what product's going to be ready when it is scheduled to be ready. We're already seeing some tranches being reduced a little bit because all the product isn't ready. So we're going ahead and close. But, everyone is working as a team. It's not a situation where people are saying, we're no longer interested. Everyone is invested. So I think that that's the positive. One market that I did want to mention that we're seeing an increase in that we haven't, for a year or so, is the luxury rental market. We're starting to see the deposits being placed on those large lots. So I think that that's encouraging. That's another market that we're going to be looking at.
Fantastic. That's super exciting. How about you, Troy? What are some opportunities you're seeing in 2024?
The opportunity that I'm excited for, and while I'm so excited about purpose-built build-front communities, is the scattered site new construction portfolio. We've done a lot in the new construction space from a builder solution standpoint on the brokerage side, but the ability to get involved with these regional builders where you can still get a good deal and drive those secondary markets, or maybe even get a new product from a new builder in a larger market, has been very exciting for us. We've been able to put packages together with several different investors in Little Rock, Arkansas, and we're starting to see this in Alabama and Augusta, Georgia. And it's been exciting. Things are really penciling out and are transactable, at the end of the day, but from various different types of clients.
I'm going to take a royalty, I think.
You should. I think I owe you like $2,000 after the amount of times I've used this. But it's really exciting to see. And then for us, like I mentioned earlier, we have the individual and the institutional side, and they're both transacting on those. And I love to see it because it's truly allowing new people to enter the space. Our team took somebody who was looking for, $60,000 homes in St. Louis to start buying some new construction in actually Little Rock. He bought two of those homes because the numbers worked, and it was great to see.
I love seeing the small individual investor coming into these markets. We're also seeing it in purchases off of some of our bridge lines where we're doing build to rent, and like they're actually selling to these individuals, which had never been the case.
Yeah, it's
in this market.
I remember, I've been here for 10 years, and when I first started on the investment side, there's some of the builders today that are extremely active who want to give an investor the time of day, right? And their sales reps would kick them out of the communities. Now you call them up with somebody, and you get a list within an hour after talking to them. You're right. People are starting to give them some focus, and I think they're starting to give themselves some focus too. And with them being a majority of the market, it's exciting to see them transact on those asset classes.
Well, it's weird. They've always been a majority of the SFR market, right? The accidental
Yeah.
landlord, the people who have one or two homes. I do think this is at least for me, it's relatively new in the build to rent space.
Yeah, it somewhat with our involvement with more of the individual owner, we've actually seen it quite a bit. It was just they were being turned away from your traditional builders, and I remember really it was Lennar and LGI were the big ones that would do this. But as other builders have started to see that success, DR Horton, some of the more regional builders as well have really started to allow them to enter that market where they've been turned away before. Some of it's had to do with management. They didn't want for rent signs going up in their communities, which is fine. Some of it has just been that they were doing so well on the move up buyer side. So it's been great to see that change.
Look, overall, it's an expansion of capital, which is a benefit to the entire space. Improves liquidity holders, just like I said, an expansion of capital. It's just a positive thing.
It really is. I think the more people we see jumping into this space and figuring out how to do these deals is a benefit for everybody involved in build for rent. Even some groups that you may look at as competition, if you're a buyer out there and an owner operator, I think it's hugely helpful for everybody to start to see more build for rent communities start leasing up and doing well. So I thank you guys for all of your insights. I think what I can truly take away from this conversation is to keep an open mind when it comes to the process of build for rent. So many things have changed, processes have changed, rate environment has changed, operational efficiencies and expenses have changed. And so I think just being able to be adaptable and work through each phase of getting these build for rent communities complete is truly going to be the most valuable skill that you can have when it comes to working in the build for rent space. We're still such a new asset and still trying to, get our feet under us and figure out what works, what is going to create the biggest rent premiums, what's going to be the best operational strategy on the back end, as well as the disposition strategy. So it is always just so exciting to see things progress in this space, and getting to hear from you all is always a pleasure. So thank you all for joining me.
Thank you all for
Thank
putting
you.
together.
Thank you. Everybody have a good day.
You too. Thank you.